Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. 6 months in, the U.S.-Israeli war in Iran continues to convulse and expand throughout the region. So is there any off-ramp? Let's get to the bottom line. Saudi Arabia joining U.S. forces to bomb and kill pro-Iranian militia members inside Iraq. And then 2 ships, including a U.S.-owned gas storage tanker, burning now in Egypt, 1,500 miles away from Iran. Yemen attacking Saudi oil facilities and Saudi Arabia striking back. Iran targeting U.S. forces in Jordan and the U.S. striking back. With no end in sight to a war sparked by the U.S. and Israel against Iran 6 months ago, the conflict is getting deeper and wider, and I would argue nastier. These aren't polite tit-for-tat strikes. More countries are getting sucked into the fight, and more havoc is being wreaked on the economy for people around the world, including Americans, who polls show disapprove of this war by a huge margin. So what's blocking Iran and the U.S. from reaching an understanding, any understanding, that would end the conflict? Or is war just stuck on default mode? Today we're talking with John Limbert, who was a U.S. diplomat in Tehran during the Iranian Revolution in 1979. He was one of the 66 Americans taken hostage there and spent more than a year in captivity. He went on to become Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Iran, and he's the author of Negotiating with Iran, Wrestling the Ghosts of History. John, I'm really very happy to be talking with you today. I think you have many more insights from your experience in Iran than many of the people in Washington that right now are running a war. But I'm interested in your take. But I'm also interested in this book that you wrote in 2009 that almost captures kind of the moment we're in now. Do you think we are wrestling the ghosts of history as we are in this conflict with Iran right now?
Very much so. We say about Americans that we forget everything, and our Iranian friends, it said they forget nothing. And history is always there with us, and you ignore it at your peril. I call it the ghosts of history because if you ignore the ghosts, they will come back to haunt you as they did us. I mean, that certainly affected me personally in 1979.
I think it's very important in negotiations, from my own perspective, to understand how your opponent walks in their shoes, how they feel things. Otherwise, you end up kind of missing each other as you're negotiating. What do you think the biggest errors right now in both sides, Iran and the United States, kind of walking past each other in these efforts to negotiate a deal?
Oh, you made a point. That's very basic in negotiations. I mean, President Nixon. I was not a great admirer of President Nixon, but he captured this perfectly when he went to China, and he sat down with a yellow pad and wrote on it, made 3 columns: what we want, what they want, and what we both want. And that was his starting point. As far as I'm aware, in this present case, our administration hasn't done that. Or if they've made 3 columns, it's all what I want, and what I want. On the Iranian side, as we saw again in 79, there's been a tendency to how could I put this, overplay their hand. In other words, take maybe what is a small advantage and push it to an extent that it does great damage to their own side. We saw that with us in 79 and 80. We saw that during the Iran-Iraq War, and I regret to say I think we're seeing it now.
I think it's indisputable what Donald Trump says, that the United States has largely obliterated Iran's Navy. It killed Iran's leader and many of its other leaders. I happen to know Ali Larijani over the years, met him every once a year. He was the person we were negotiating with. He is dead. Lots of Iranian leaders are dead. Lots of Iranian military capacity destroyed. And in President Trump's mind, and I would also say Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's mind, much of Iran's capacity has been eroded and destroyed. Why do you think, if those things are true, that Iran has not capitulated, has not fallen prostrate before the President of the United States and said, hey, we give up?
Well, again, I think it's not really difficult. I mean, if you had asked me, or if you had asked anyone with some background in the area, they would have told you that the Islamic Republic, which by the way I'm not a great fan, has been resilient over 47 years. It's survived much longer than anyone has thought it would. Um, People thought its own um, tendency, its own ability to make gratuitous enemies, its own mismanagement, its insistence on restricting a creative people would bring it down. It hasn't. It's still there. It's resilient. It survived. It survived 47 years of international isolation, a terrible war with 8-year war with Iraq. It survived its own colossal mismanagement. It survived the loss of leaders. I mean, Khomeini himself died in 1989, and the system continued. Uh, in this case, you cannot bomb and assassinate your way to a better relationship. That should have been obvious, but somehow it wasn't. And so, as I said, perhaps they didn't learn the lesson of history.
You know, when President Rouhani was in place, there was a time when President Trump was trying very, very hard to meet with him and also reset U.S.-Iran relations. What do you think has largely, kind of kept us off track?
I think President Obama did want to reset relations, and it took about 4 or 5 years to get started. I mean, the first 4 years it was just stalemated. There were all kinds of reasons for it on both sides of the relationship. But there was within his administration a mentality that goes back to the 1980s. And it's a very destructive one, and it's basically saying this is talking on the American side, whatever we do with Iran, we cannot look weak. We have to appear tough. We have to appear strong. And in my research, in my reading, I found this actually was based on a lie propagated by the late CIA chief Bill Casey, when he wanted to cover up his dealings with the Iranians during the 1980 presidential campaign.
You know, when Zbigniew Brzezinski was President Carter's national security advisor, he advocated to the Shah to use the iron fist, to do what needed to be done. Donald Trump seems to be threatening the iron fist. Does that get him latitude with the Iranians?
No. It does not. This is, as I say, this was part of, I referred to this earlier, this was part of this lie propagated by Bill Casey. When he said, he claimed that the reason we were released when we were at the beginning of the Reagan administration,
Right.
was because the Islamic Republic was afraid of a tough Reagan administration replacing a weaker Carter administration. This covers up the lie, which of course was that he had bribed the Iranians into keeping us 3 months longer in order to ensure Reagan's election in 1980. I mean, the deal was done. The deal was done back in September, October of 1980.
Right.
But Casey promised weapons. He promised actually delivered some weapons to the Iranians if they held us longer. Of course, since they already disliked Carter, that was a pretty easy sell.
Fascinating. You were there with other Americans, held for 444 days, held hostage essentially by the Iranian government during their revolution. I'd love to hear about that moment, but you also had one of the most incredible visitors. Of course, the late Ali Khamenei, supreme leader of Iran, was not supreme leader then, but he showed up with cameras to interview you. I'd love to hear about it.
Well, at the time he was not a first-rank figure, nor was he a senior clergyman. He was, I suppose you would say, he was the um, equivalent of an associate professor in the clerical hierarchy. He was important. I mean, he was, I think, the Friday prayer leader of Tehran, and he was within the defense establishment. But who knew that he was going to be one day both president of the country and then supreme leader? But in any case, no. I mean, I had the problem. The problem for me, I mean, what really aided me through this whole thing, in addition to, of course, being locked up, was the fact that I had all of my interactions with Iran and Iranians in the previous, going back to the 1960s, had been very positive. Um, with students, with friends, with family members. I mean, I married into a very cultured, well-educated Iranian family, very welcoming. But interactions, again, there were very strict rules that govern interactions, and among those are the obligations of a host and the obligations of a guest. And a host simply does not abuse a guest for whose responsibility he is, for whose safety he is responsible. And Iran, whatever government was there, and I was still considered myself a diplomat accredited to whatever government existed, they were responsible for our security. Under traditions going back to Greek and Roman times, and they had abused that. They had violated not only international law, but their own sort of deepest religious and national traditions. It says, look, you may not like your guest, you may hate this person's guts, but you are responsible for their security as long as they are in your charge. And they had neglected that. Did he understand that message? I'm not sure. I thought he did. I thought he was smart enough to do so.
As you've written and argued, I think, Iran often is not negotiating about the moment, it's negotiating about the future. Iran is trying to basically reset the signal, don't mess with us or we can do X. How do you think the United States might more successfully engage Iran if it is projecting out the future, as opposed to President Trump, who kind of wants this to be, tied up, solved, and move on with life?
Right. I mean, you think about it. So many presidents. I mean, how many American presidents have come to grief over Iran? I mean, Iran cost Jimmy Carter his office. It almost came within an eyelash of costing Ronald Reagan his office. A lot of presidents have come into office saying, "Oh, we're just not going to deal with Iran. We have nothing to do with it. We have, bigger problems." And somehow Iran always grabs their attention. I was asked. It's interesting you raised this, because I was asked. I was on another network, a quite conservative one. And they asked me, aren't you gratified that President Trump is doing what attacked Iran, which none of his predecessors were willing to do? And I said, no, on the contrary. His predecessors were smart enough to know that there are other ways of dealing with Iran. It isn't rocket science here. Negotiation means having patience, having the ability to listen, having perseverance. If one door is closed, you look for another. You look for another door. I mean, it took the Obama administration 4 years before its outreach efforts in the nuclear began to have results, and ended up in the JCPOA. It wasn't a perfect agreement, but then no negotiated agreement is ever perfect.
You were part of the team that was preparing to negotiate with Iran during the Obama administration, but you left that team. Can you share with us why you left the scene?
Well, a couple of reasons. We weren't getting anywhere. And it was very clear. I think a lot of the reasons were on the Iranian side because I think President Obama's approach caught them off guard. It wrong-footed them. They were used to having American presidents that denounced them or pushed on them, and so we pushed and they pushed back, and that was easy. But now you had a president who addressed the country by its official name, unprecedented. You had him talking about mutual respect, which is what they had said they wanted for many years. He sent greetings, very warm greetings on the Iranian New Year. And the Iranians didn't know how to deal with this. Plus, you had President Ahmadinejad in Tehran, who himself became part of the problem. And it was the point that no one was going to listen to him. And I'd gone to the State Department, back to the State Department from a tenured faculty or endowed faculty position at the U.S. Naval Academy, which I loved. So basically, it was a question: do I want to keep this wonderful endowed position at the academy, or do I want to spin wheels for another 3 or 4 years? And it wasn't till the Iranian administration changed, and the U.S. modified some of its positions. That's after 2013, during the second Obama administration, that you had the breakthrough.
In negotiations with Iran, there always seems to be a third chair in the room. And just to be blunt, it usually is Israel. And Israel has a lot of maneuvering room in the region. And we saw before this conflict Israel's extraordinary ability to penetrate, the Iranian borders, to assassinate leaders, to have incredible intelligence about what was going on. And so they're part of the picture. And I'm just interested in your insights as to whether you think there's an accommodation possible down the road if you were able to align the United States and Iran, which is a big if. Is there an accommodation that's possible with Israel as well?
That's a good question, and it's a hard. I mean, the Israelis. I think Israel is somewhere I read the 6th or 7th largest Persian-speaking country in the world, has the 6th or 7th largest Persian-speaking population. So they're pretty well informed, and obviously from what they've done. But the hostility is fascinating because it doesn't serve anybody's interest. The Iranians for 47 years have been marching around denouncing Israel and threatening to eliminate it. And when you do that for 47 years, you're going to provoke a reaction, and they have. And what they have done by all of their anti-Israeli rhetoric and threats and actions is to feed the most extreme elements within Israel. The story going around was when back in 2013, when President Ahmadinejad left office and President Rouhani came into office, the joke was that Prime Minister Netanyahu went into mourning because Ahmadinejad was his best friend in terms of strengthening his electoral position within Israel. Because the more he threatened, the more popular Netanyahu's tough line and hard line against Iran became. So I think Iran has to look very closely at what its interests are and how self-destructive this anti-Israeli actions and rhetoric have been, as have been its anti-American. I mean, the country's gone around for 47 years threatening and denouncing the United States and Israel. At the end of the day, all it took was the wrong combination of people and circumstances to provoke the current fighting. I should add, by the way, that there are many Iranians that you talk to, and many thoughtful Iranians, not opposition figures necessarily, who recognize how self-destructive this anti-American and anti-Israeli rhetoric has been.
You know the region well. You're an American. You worked in the U.S. Foreign Service. How do you see this evolving from this point forward? How does this end?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. You put such good questions that I wish I had better answers. First of all, I should say, I and many friends and colleagues, not just Americans, but Iranians and Europeans and many others have worked for a long time, for decades, to avoid just what we've gotten into today. But again, maybe 47 years of this hostility and this failure to be able to speak with each other, maybe such an outcome was inevitable. Where do we get to? I mean, the immediate goals are pretty clear. It goes back to what we want and what they want. What we want is a number of things. We want freedom of navigation in the Gulf. We want Iran to not attack its neighbors or other countries in the region. We want some kind of restriction or assurances about Iran's nuclear program. What Iran wants, they want probably first, above all, economic relief, because their economy has just fallen into a chasm, and the people there are suffering terribly because of it, and many have been forced to leave. They also want, I think, assurances from attack, from efforts to undermine the government, these kinds of things. Now, can we get there? But now. The way you get there, of course, is use the tools of diplomacy. You start talking to each other, and you may not get immediate results, but the first step is to be able to talk. And what I think we know you can't. You're not in a situation where you can simply dictate to the other side. We can't dictate to the Iranians. I think we should know that by now. The Iranians cannot dictate to us. But unfortunately, we seem in a situation today where both sides think they can. And they have deluded themselves to think, all we have to do is drop more bombs and the Iranians will do what we want. And the Iranians say, all we have to do is keep attacking ships in the Strait, and the American eyes will eventually do what we want. That's not diplomacy. So somehow we have to get back to the idea that you can settle these things by diplomacy, and you can actually get something that you want. Maybe not all of it, but some of it.
Well, we'll have to end it there. John Limbert, former U.S. diplomat and former hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Iran, really appreciate your insights, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So what's the bottom line? Iran is widening a war with the United States that Donald Trump is trapped in and wants to escape, but he just can't. Iran has now fired missiles targeting U.S. assets in Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and possibly Egypt, after already hitting targets in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. One thing Iran is doing by these attacks is reminding the entire region and the people who live there that the U.S. has bases and military deployed nearly everywhere in the region. On the one hand, people see that the U.S. deployments are making them targets. And on the other, they hear and see a U.S. president who doesn't really have a fundamental interest in their own security or fairness for the Palestinians, for that matter, but rather joined up in a war alongside its best friend, Israel. There's no quick end to this conflict, which is becoming a classic quagmire. Don't want to stay, but can't leave. What's pretty certain is that after this conflict does end, America's assets in the Middle East will shrink further and recede as they are making the hosts victims more than winners in this conflict. And that's the bottom line.